Well, hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back for week number 3 or episode video number 3 of our series, The Good News. I'm really excited about this week because this one's a whole lot of fun. I love this story actually that we're going to jump into this week. But in case maybe this is your first one jumping into, I would definitely recommend you go back and watch week number 1 and week number 2, even though I say week number 1 in the second one, but we've moved past on that by this point. So I would definitely recommend you go back and watch week number 1 and number 2. That way you're all kind of caught up and stuff like that. So we are in a series called The Good News. We are looking at the basic overarching piece of good news. Basically, it's Jesus's life specifically that we're looking at, but we're basically looking at different stories from Jesus's life. Ooh, I have some hiccups. Not hiccups, whatever. So we're looking at the life of Jesus, basically, and at the time of filming this, we are kind of at the tail end, if you will, of this whole coronavirus pandemic. At least I hope we're on the tail end of it. And I think in this time and season, we have a lot of bad news, and I think it'd be great to have some good news in this time. So that was kind of a bit of a reason why we jumped into this series called The Good News. But also I think it's just really important and really good for us to look at really just the good news and who Jesus is and that sort of thing. So this week, we're looking at a story from the book of Luke. So if you don't know your Gospels, you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the first 4 books of the New Testament, and we are looking at Luke today. So we're actually going to be in Luke chapter 6, and we're going to read from verses 6 down through 11. So Luke chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. And so I'm going to read it, and then we will kind of jump into everything. So it says, verse 6, "On another Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find a reason to accuse him." So the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they are looking at Jesus to see if he would heal someone on the Sabbath because that was unlawful in that day. But he knew their thoughts, and he being Jesus in this, but he knew their thoughts, and he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come and stand here." And he rose and stood there. And Jesus said to him, "I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it?" And after looking at them, he said to him, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. So this is a very interesting story, and I think so we'll kind of jump into this a little bit in an interesting way. So what I love about the gospel, especially the stories of Jesus, is we can look at the gospel and life of Jesus, and we can look at it in 2 primary ways. We can do a macro view or a micro view. So in case you don't know the difference between those words, so macro with an A is kind of the overarching zoomed out drone aerial view. Micro, kind of like microorganism, is very small. So we can either go macro or drone view, and we can look at the basics, the bare minimum, if you will, of the story and just kind of get a general overarching look at it. Or we can get really micro in it and look at like each word, each sentence, that sort of thing. So I think that's really cool about the gospel, that we can do that. We can do both kind of at the same time too, but we can get a drone or macro view, or we can get a micro view. So my first question, and basically with these questions, you can either just answer them in the back of your head if you want, or you can put the comment below, however you want to do with these questions. So my first question is, from a drone view, what's the takeaway from this story? So from a macro or a drone view, what is the takeaway from the story? And so again, you can just kind of answer. You can pause this and take a second and think about it. You can always comment below, whichever one you want to do. So from a drone view, again, we asked these questions in discussion, and the general consensus was God heals people. I think one of the answers was it's I don't remember off the top of my head now that I'm thinking about it. I don't remember what the other answer was, but more or less the general overview was God heals people because he healed the guy with the withered hand. So again, I love what's cool about the gospel is that we can get both really macro and really micro, and either way, it's not necessarily wrong one of the two ways, but you can do that. So then my next question, we'll kind of follow this up with this, is because what we see from, and I don't have my verses actually numbered here, so I can't really say exactly which verse it is. But one of the, basically sentence, I guess we can say, was, and the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath so that they might find a reason to accuse him. So my next question with this is, and again, you can just answer in your head, you can put a comment, whichever one you want to do, is why would the scribes and Pharisees be looking for a reason to accuse Jesus? Why would they be finding a reason to accuse Jesus? So maybe you don't actually know what a scribe or a Pharisee is. Maybe you're kind of new to this whole gospel Bible thing. Basically, a scribe and a Pharisee were the religious leaders of the day. They were the pastors, the priests, the really spiritual people of that day. So it might be kind of an interesting question of, okay, why would the religious leaders of that day, why would they be trying to find a reason to accuse God? Because, I mean, shouldn't they be preaching the message of God? But yet, for some reason, they're accusing him. So you can take a second and you can answer that however you want to. So basically, my response to these two questions or this question at least, is I think this is a great story to introduce this idea of religion versus relationship, or Jesus. Okay, so religion versus relationship. So what you have is you have religion on one side and you have relationship on another. So with religion, okay, what is religion in this context that we're talking about? Religion basically is this: you've got to perform and be good enough. Religion is this ascension to being holy. It's this work and this ascension towards being godlike, being perfect, being holy, that sort of thing. Then on the other hand, you have religion, which is Jesus was good enough for you so that you don't have to be. So you could think of it like in this, and this is actually an interesting way that I've heard this written before, is religion is man working our way up to God. So religion is man working our way up to God, but relationship is God coming down to us. So when I mention this whole idea of religion versus relationship, really what I'm talking about is religion says you've got to be good enough, you've got to perform up to standard, you've got to bat 10,000, you've got to do everything right, you've got to get A pluses on your tests, you've got to do everything perfectly right, because if you don't, God's going to be mad at you. But on the other hand, you have religion or relationship. On the other hand, you have relationship, which is that God was good enough for you. Jesus came to this planet and he lived a perfect life. He was good enough for you. He performed up to standard for you so that you don't have to. You're not forced to live this life that says, hey, you have to perform all the way up to standard 100% of the time. So, getting back to this story, again, one thing that we find is that Jesus is dealing with a man with a withered hand. So, most of you probably have no idea what a withered hand is. You may have an idea, but maybe not necessarily an exact answer as to what a withered hand is. So, a withered hand, I was doing a little bit of research, and it's actually kind of interesting what a withered hand would be. So, basically, you could think of like your hand that would be kind of shriveled up, dried up. You probably have a lot of really crazy stuff going on with your skin, but more or less at the end of the day, you have no use of the hand. There's no power there. There is nothing really that this hand is good for anymore. And even what's interesting is I found that if you had a withered hand, most of the time that stuff would travel up your arm anyways. So most likely this guy that's coming to Jesus, his whole hand, probably forearm most likely, maybe even all the way up to a shoulder, we're not really sure, but I would suggest probably most likely at least up to his elbow, everything down is basically just kind of crippled, useless. There's no power, there's no muscle there. There's really nothing beneficial with this hand. So you could imagine most likely this guy is coming into this church service, the synagogue, as we see from one of the earlier verses, is we see that this man comes into the synagogue, he comes into the church basically, and his arm is powerless. There's no power there. And so obviously most likely he will have his arm kind of tucked away. It'll be kind of probably covered or some sort, and it'll be put away. So, most likely what would happen too is as people would have some sort of physical thing like that was wrong, or some sort of like disease, if you will, most of the time what people believed was that if you had something like that, the reason was because you had some sort of sin early on in your life. So maybe at some point this man must have killed somebody, he must have stole from a bank, maybe he must have done something crazy bad. So because he did that, that's why he would have this. So basically people would see these big diseases as punishment from God, therefore God rejected them. So as someone had something like this happening to them, they were rejected by God, they were pushed to the side because obviously they did something to make God angry. So this man's coming to the synagogue and he sees Jesus there. Now, most likely, what most people will think is that he's there to see if Jesus will heal him, because they think maybe if I'm just close to this guy, maybe he'll heal me. Okay? So it's an interesting thing that we find from all this little extra bit. So my next question that you can kind of answer in the back of your head, or you can put in the comments below, whichever one you want to do, is given that extra info about this man's arm, what makes this story significant? So what makes this story significant? So again, you can answer that in the back of your head, or you can put a comment below, whichever one you want to do. So I think this kind of shows a key part about our relationship with God, okay? Is most of us, we have not lived a perfect life. In fact, if you've lived a perfect life, you're Jesus, and no one's Jesus right now. So every one of us has lived some sort of something in our life that is not quite up to standard, up to par, okay? So we've all messed up at some point. Most likely that mess up, that sin that we have in our life, we kind of tend to think of it like a withered hand. It's kind of this thing that we put behind closed doors, we kind of keep to ourselves. We're not really like, of course, we don't want to air out our dirty laundry, that sort of thing. We don't want to put everything on Instagram that happens, that sort of thing. So we kind of tend to hide those things that are, hey, we did this bad thing back whenever, so we're going to hide it. We tend to do that. And what I think is so significant about this story is this shows both in a physical sense and kind of a philosophical, metaphorical sense that those bad things that we have in our life, those sins maybe that we've committed, maybe addictions we've had, maybe bad decisions we've made, that when we put those out towards Jesus, he not only heals us, but he accepts us. Regardless of how bad you think you are, because probably most of us think we're pretty terrible. But regardless of how bad you think you are, regardless of how bad you think you've messed up, you can put those things out to God. You can give those struggles, you can give those things to God, and he does not turn you away from them. He does not reject you because of them. In fact, he heals them. And I think what's even more significant about this story too is that Jesus did not heal the man until he did one specific thing. He brought his arm out. He gave his hand, he brought it out to Jesus, he showed it to Jesus. So as you and I continue to hold onto the things of our past, maybe bad decisions, whatever it could be, as we hold on to those things in our past, we kind of don't give Jesus the opportunity to heal them. So for some of us, we want healing from things, and the very first step that you've got to do to have healing from some bad decisions or bad things that you've held on to in your past is to give it to Jesus. Because God, one, he wants to heal you, that's for one, and two, he accepts you. Even regardless of how bad you think you are, Jesus still accepts you. He still does. He has no reason at all to think less of you. God does not think less of you because you have a withered hand, so to speak. So my encouragement for you guys this week, I haven't really done this for the past few weeks, but this week specifically, my encouragement to you is this. Those things that you have in your past, those things that you maybe are holding on to still, that you think God's going to hate you for, God's going to reject you for, God's going to judge you for, give those things to God. Give them to God. He wants to heal you from those things. And I think more importantly, God wants to, as he heals you, help you move forward and help you live a life that is God first, that puts him in priority and that puts him first. So as we look at the story, I think the one thing that we can make sure that we all understand and all kind of remember from this is that God wants to heal those things from your past, and God still loves you. God still accepts you regardless of how bad you think you are. Regardless of any of that stuff, God loves you. So thank you so much for watching this week number 3 of Good News, even though this is 3 weeks. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys, hope this encourages you. And if you have prayer requests, you can DM us on Instagram or even on Facebook if you have Facebook. We are CM Youth, which will have it kind of down here wherever the bottom of this frame is. And we would love to connect with you, pray with you, and that sort of thing. So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.